Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the wooden chambers of a samurai household, where shadows from a single oil lantern flicker against paper walls, and the air smells faintly of charred wick and ink ground fresh from a solid block. The night is late. The rest of the house has long since gone still, but you are just settling in, not for sleep, but for writing practice. You probably won't survive this schedule if you try it yourself, because these men of discipline considered a few extra hours of scribbling characters just as vital as sharpening a blade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you don't mind, share your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all are listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floor creaks beneath you as you lower yourself onto a thin tatami mat. In front of you, there's a low writing table. Plain wood, no ornamentation, because nothing should distract you. On it sits an inkstone, a brush, and a stack of paper sheets cut from mulberry bark. The lantern hisses faintly, its flame dancing, reminding you of the candle that will one day burn down faster than your patience. You dip your brush in water, grind the solid ink stick slowly in circles against the stone. The sound is soft, almost like sand under waves. This is where the night begins, with patience, repetition, and the acceptance that nothing beautiful is produced quickly. Writing for the samurai was never just about writing. It was discipline, mental calisthenics to keep the mind sharp and steady. Every evening, you sit down and form kanji characters, not to send letters, but to remind yourself that clarity of mind must match clarity of sword. A messy character, one splotch of ink too heavy, and you see it as a flaw in your inner balance. You groan softly, thinking it's unfair that after a day of training, guard duty, and probably a lecture about loyalty, you still can't crawl into bed. No, your brush waits. The air inside the chamber is still, except for the faint scratching of the brush. It's not the crisp clack of a pen. It's more like the whisper of hair dragging liquid over paper. You notice how your hand wants to tremble after the first dozen strokes, so you force yourself to relax your wrist, straighten your back. In some training scrolls, they warn, tension in the body makes tension in the spirit. You sigh, maybe roll your eyes, but you adjust anyway, because who are you to argue with centuries of ancestors? Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many samurai were trained in calligraphy from childhood, not only to sign documents, but also because fine brushwork was a marker of education and refinement. They were expected to be warriors, but also gentlemen, able to compose a poem, pen a letter, or copy Buddhist sutras with elegance. Think of it as the original version of warrior poet, though without the Instagram filter. The writing practice at night was less about producing masterpieces and more about maintaining steady practice, just like daily sword drills. And then, there are the quirky bits you'd never expect. One odd tidbit is that some samurai deliberately practiced under the worst lighting conditions, dim lanterns, smoky candles, because it forced their eyes and concentration to sharpen. Imagine doing homework by the equivalent of a dollar store flashlight on purpose. The idea was simple. If you could make your brush strokes clean when squinting in the dark, you could do anything in daylight. Tonight, as you lean closer to your paper, the flame flickers just to taunt you and you mutter something like, "Sure, because giving myself a headache is exactly what makes me a stronger person." Historians still argue whether this nightly writing routine was strictly enforced across all samurai households, or more of an elite pastime reserved for wealthier clans. Some accounts suggest every samurai boy endured it as much as weapon drills, while others argue it was more a cultivated habit for those who could afford lantern oil and endless stacks of paper. After all, mulberry bark sheets weren't cheap, and the idea of wasting paper on practice strokes might sound indulgent to poorer retainers. So, as always, scholars debate, was this universal discipline, or just another privilege of the upper tier? You push aside that thought and focus back on your hand. Brush tip to paper. Lift, twist, drag. The character for heart. The character for patience. The character for death. Maybe. Just because someone thought that would keep you humble before bed. Each kanji you form isn't just writing. It's philosophy. A reminder of principles you're meant to embody. The repetition is dull, yes, but soothing too. The rhythm almost lulls you like a rocking boat. Your back starts to ache. You stretch, crack your knuckles, and hear your neighbor through the wall snoring. He's probably done with his practice early. Either he's a natural calligrapher, or he cheated and left his paper blank. You imagine tomorrow morning, when the instructor comes around, that guy will proudly hold up his spotless sheet, pretending it's minimalist poetry. You chuckle quietly. Even in the 1600s, someone was trying to bluff their homework. The lantern sputters again. You add more oil, careful not to smudge the page. The night grows colder, and you pull your robe tighter around your shoulders. Outside, crickets chirp, their rhythm syncing with the brush's strokes. You realize the whole act is strangely hypnotic. Ink, breath, paper, silence. Like a bedtime mantra that only happens to require perfect handwriting. Of course, you can't help but drift into silly thoughts. If someone from the future dropped in, showing off a ballpoint pen that works in any direction without smudging, you'd probably faint with joy. Imagine a samurai duel where the loser is forced to practice cursive all night. Well, honestly, that might be worse than being skewered. Still, you keep writing. Page after page fills with characters. Each line steadier than the last. Your wrist aches, but your mind clears. Eventually, you notice how the steady repetition slows your breath, makes your eyelids heavier. It's like tricking yourself into sleep, one kanji at a time. And maybe that's the hidden genius here. You practice discipline, yes, but you also lull your own restless warrior brain into shutting down. You stack your papers carefully, aware that tomorrow someone might actually look at them, or not, who knows. You rinse your brush, wipe the inkstone, and watch as the lantern burns lower, its flame shrinking. The night has not been wasted, though your hand might disagree. You lie back on your tatami, eyes still buzzing with faint afterimages of black strokes, like ghosts of writing following you into dreams. You rub the sleep from your eyes and straighten your back, because the brush in your hand isn't just a tool for making characters. It's a weapon in disguise. At least, that's how your teachers explain it. You're reminded again tonight that calligraphy is less about pretty writing and more about practicing the same focus you'd need in a sword fight. The paper in front of you is no battlefield, but every stroke has to be deliberate, controlled, and absolute. Slip here, and you don't just make a blot. You reveal weakness. The brush feels surprisingly similar to the hilt of a sword in its demand for posture. You grip it vertically, not sideways like a modern pen. Your elbow floats away from the body, shoulders loose, wrist free, but aligned. Each stroke begins with a pause, a small inhale, and then a decisive movement downward. You can almost hear your sword instructor's voice saying, "Don't hesitate, commit." The writing table has turned into your silent dojo. Mainstream fact: many schools of swordsmanship in Japan specifically used calligraphy as a parallel exercise. They believed the qualities of brushwork, balance, rhythm, decisiveness, were the same as those needed in combat. A master like Miyamoto Musashi, famed for dueling with two swords, also wrote treatises with brush and ink, his strokes sharp and forceful like his strikes. For him, and for countless others, the brush was training for the mind when the sword rested in its sheath. You lean closer and feel your breath slowing. The brush descends in one fluid motion, thick at the start, tapering off with a crisp flick. The character on the page looks strong. It doesn't matter that nobody will ever read these practice sheets. What matters is that you treated the act with the seriousness of a strike. After all, tomorrow's duel might be against someone who practiced twice as long, and wouldn't that be embarrassing? To lose not because you were weaker, but because you were sloppier. A fringe tidbit slips in. Some instructors told their pupils to imagine each brushstroke was an enemy to be cut down. Each downward motion, a killing blow. Each curve, a parry. Writing was not passive, it was shadow training for battle. Of course, picturing your kanji as miniature duels might seem dramatic, but then again, you're a samurai. Everything is dramatic. It's practically your job description. You smirk at the idea of writing out your grocery list like a tactical campaign. Rice, fish, lantern oil, defeated in honorable combat. Still, historians argue whether the link between swordsmanship and calligraphy was really so literal, or whether it's a romantic idea retroactively projected onto the samurai class. Was every stroke really meant as a swing, or was that just poetic metaphor layered on later? Some accounts are clear about the training overlap, while others suggest it was more about cultivating patience and discipline in general. Either way, the myth has stuck, and now you're stuck too. Up at midnight, killing imaginary foes with a brush while your body aches for bed. The rhythm deepens as you continue. There's a meditative hum in it, almost like the sound of rain on a roof. Brush up, brush down, pause, breathe. You remember that advice? The brush should flow like water, unstoppable but controlled. In your mind, water becomes a blade, a torrent cutting through obstacles. You're half convinced your strokes tonight could slice through steel, though in reality, they're barely slicing through cheap paper. To keep things interesting, you switch up your practice. Large characters, then small, bold lines, then delicate whispers. Each adjustment mirrors variations in combat. A heavy downward slash, a quick sidestep feint, a subtle wrist flick. The brush becomes a dance partner. And like every dance, you occasionally step on its toes. The blotches stare back at you like wounds, evidence of hesitation. You sigh, but keep going. After all, you've been told 1,000 times, consistency beats perfection. Your hand cramps. You shake it out, pretending for a moment that it's the aftermath of battle. The ink has stained your fingers. You flex them, black smudges marking your skin like war paint. It's absurd, but also strangely satisfying. If anyone barged in right now, you'd look less like a writer and more like someone caught in the aftermath of a very clumsy duel with a squid. You press on because the training isn't just about you. Imagine tomorrow when your Lord asks for a written report, or when you're expected to compose a poem for a festival. The shame of handing over crooked, sloppy work would be unbearable. Better to sweat here in silence than to falter in public. Calligraphy is social armor as much as mental training, another way of protecting your honor. You pause long enough to glance at the growing stack of papers. Each page feels like a sparring session won or lost. Some are clean, proud strokes. Others are disasters you'll probably hide under the pile. Still, the process matters more than the product. It's a nightly duel with yourself, and every victory is private. And here's the oddest twist. Some teachers recommended practicing calligraphy while standing, brush in one hand, the other hand resting on your sword hilt. Yes, even in writing, you never fully let go of your weapon. The stance reminded students that balance, readiness, and presence of mind should carry into every movement. Try to imagine doing your homework like that, half poised to defend against intruders. It sounds exhausting, but also very on brand for a group of people who treated breathing itself as a discipline. As the night drags on, you notice the similarities growing stronger. The silence, the posture, the focus. It's indistinguishable from sword training, just without the bruises. Or at least, without most of them. The only injury tonight is your wrist cramp, and maybe the ink stain on your robe that will never wash out. You finally finish one more page, set the brush down, and exhale. For a moment, the room feels different. The lantern flickers, the tatami smells faintly of straw, and your breath feels heavy but calm. You're not sure whether you've practiced calligraphy or swordsmanship tonight. Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. Your eyelids sag, but there's still more to do. Tomorrow night, more characters, more strokes, more invisible battles. The brush doesn't care that you're tired. The sword certainly won't. You pull the papers into a neat stack, let the ink dry, and imagine yourself stepping off a battlefield, victorious but weary. Except here, the enemy was paper, and the victory is simply making it to bed without spilling ink on your pillow. You've settled into the rhythm by now, though your wrist probably hates you for it. The lantern's glow is dimmer than before. Shadows gathering in the corners of your room like silent judges. Tonight, you notice the little quirks, the strange tools, and odd rituals that sneak into this nightly writing practice. Because, as disciplined as the samurai were, they also had habits that can only be described as peculiar. The first step, as always, is grinding ink. You take the solid stick, press it against the stone, and circle, circle, circle. The sound is low, like distant rain on tile. It's meditative, but also tedious. You could probably do this in your sleep. Some samurai genuinely treated the ink grinding itself as a form of prayer or mental cleansing. The longer the grind, the more time to steady thoughts. Imagine starting your homework assignment with 15 minutes of sharpening pencils, except the sharpening is supposed to align your soul. You sigh, thinking, yep, this is going to take a while. The paper itself could be special too. Ordinary sheets worked fine, but some warriors preferred more fragrant varieties, paper infused with herbs or flowers that gave off a subtle smell when touched by ink. It wasn't just aesthetic. They believed the scent helped focus the mind. Or maybe it just made the task less of a drag. Tonight, your sheets smell faintly of plum blossom, and every time your brush moves, the fragrance lifts, mixing with the smoky lantern air. It's weirdly calming, though you're also half hungry because it reminds you of sweets. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Many samurai, especially in the Edo period, practiced copying Buddhist sutras before bedtime. This wasn't just religious duty. It was discipline and meditation rolled into one. Writing holy texts word for word was said to calm the spirit and purify the mind. Plus, if you happened to drop dead in the middle of the night, at least you'd gone out with some merit points stored up. But then there's the quirky fringe side. Some samurai attached little charms or talismans to their brushes, believing these would steady the hand or bring clarity. Picture tying a lucky bead or tiny bell onto your pen before writing essays. Not exactly standard office supplies, but then again, neither is a sword on your hip while you're drafting a haiku. You grin at the thought, oh, this, just my brush, ink, and tiny spirit guardian charm. Don't worry about it. Of course, historians still argue whether these talismans were common practice or more of a superstitious quirk among individuals. Some claim the charms were purely decorative. Others insist warriors genuinely believed they influenced the flow of ink. The debate continues because surviving brushes rarely keep their little dangly accessories intact. So, it's another case of, was it widespread tradition? Or just one guy trying to blame his messy handwriting on a cursed brush? You keep practicing, but tonight your instructor has added another wrinkle. Writing with your non-dominant hand. Yes, apparently that was a thing. The idea was that training both hands to write would make you ambidextrous in combat, or at least prevent your mind from becoming too rigid. You try it, and the result looks like a toddler's drawing of a spider. You laugh under your breath, imagining presenting that sheet to your daimyo. Behold my art. He'd probably just send you straight back to kindergarten. Another odd ritual. Some samurai wrote in near darkness on purpose, using just the faintest flicker of flame to force sharper concentration. You squint at your paper now, wondering if your characters even exist or if you're just painting abstract shapes. Tomorrow morning, the daylight might reveal either elegant script or something that looks suspiciously like ramen noodles. You shrug. That's future you's problem. And then there's the little matter of posture. Some manuals recommended kneeling properly in Zzz, legs folded neatly under you, for the entire practice. It's supposed to cultivate patience and endurance. In reality, it makes your feet fall asleep in 10 minutes. You shift uncomfortably, telling yourself the numbness is part of the training. Your body groans, but your teacher would probably just call it character development. To break up the monotony, you might be asked to copy poetry instead of random characters. Lines about cherry blossoms, the impermanence of life, or the calm beauty of rivers. The irony is, while you're writing about peaceful flowers, your leg is screaming in pins and needles. It's like trying to meditate while sitting on a Lego. But hey, discipline. Your mind drifts to the stranger rituals again. There's a rumor that some warriors preferred to write while wearing pieces of armor, just to feel the weight and remind themselves of readiness. You picture yourself hunched over paper in full chest plate, helmet sliding forward, gauntlets clumsy on the brush. Honestly, it sounds more like a comedy sketch than a solemn practice. Still, the idea wasn't completely absurd. Always write as if battle could call you away at any moment. You pause, stretch your legs, and watch the ink dry on the page. The smell of charred wick, fragrant paper, and old tatami weaved together into a sleepy perfume. The brush in your hand feels lighter now, though your mind is heavier with drowsiness. Each stroke grows slower, lazier. At one point, you actually yawn mid-character, leaving a wobble in the line. You chuckle, muttering, "Guess the enemy got one lucky hit in." The night grows quieter. Even the crickets outside seem to have dozed off. You shuffle the finished pages, noticing how some are neat, some messy, and some look like they were attacked by ink demons. Still, the ritual has done its job. Your breathing is slow, your mind clearer. The rituals, however strange, work as a bridge between the chaos of daytime and the stillness of sleep. You rinse the brush carefully, as if cleansing not just the bristles, but the clutter in your thoughts. The inkstone glistens with leftover liquid darkness. You pack the papers neatly, talisman still dangling from your brush, and set everything aside. The lantern sputters lower. Soon, only faint afterimages of strokes remain behind your eyelids, like ghostly reminders of the night's practice. And maybe, you think as you lie down, this whole ritual was never really about writing at all. Maybe it was just a clever way to trick the restless warrior brain into slowing down, focusing on simple, repetitive movements until sleep finally wins. Either way, it worked. You're already halfway gone. Your brush is nearly dry. Your hand tired. But the night isn't over until your thoughts wander into the realm of debates and dreams. This is the part where all the repetition, the rituals, and the sleepy focus start to blur into bigger questions. The kind that historians still can't quite agree on. You shift on the tatami, your papers stacked neatly by your side, and let your mind float between what you know, what you've practiced, and what remains uncertain. It's funny when you think about it. Was all this writing really about art? Or was it just another form of discipline disguised in ink? Some scholars argue that samurai truly pursued beauty, that their nightly calligraphy was as much about cultivating aesthetic taste as it was about self-control. Others insist it was never about artistry at all, only about proving you had the patience and mental endurance to withstand tedium without complaint. You sit there, brush still in hand, and realize you've lived both sides of that argument tonight. Some of your characters looked elegant, others looked like a chicken walked across the page. Either way, you're still here, practicing. The mainstream fact worth holding on to is this: calligraphy was widely respected in samurai culture. To write gracefully was to show not only education, but refinement of spirit. A warrior who could compose a death poem before battle, or copy a sutra in steady strokes, demonstrated a balance of strength and calm. In other words, being good at calligraphy wasn't just a hobby. It was proof you weren't a brute with a blade, but a cultivated man of discipline. But here's a quirky tidbit that might surprise you. Some samurai actually drafted letters and practice sheets knowing they might never send them. They wrote as if composing for future readers, imaginary correspondents who would never exist. Almost like writing a diary that wasn't meant to be private, but wasn't meant to be read either. It was practice in humility, an exercise in writing for the sake of writing rather than praise. Imagine filling notebooks with emails you'll never send just to sharpen your grammar. You sigh, wondering how many forests disappeared for the sake of practice letters. Historians still argue whether nightly writing rituals were truly widespread or more idealized in later retellings. Some evidence suggests only the higher-ranking samurai with leisure time could indulge in long evenings of grinding ink and copying poetry. Others argue that even low-ranking retainers with fewer resources still practiced at least a few strokes each night, because the discipline was seen as essential to identity. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but the lack of perfect evidence keeps the debate alive. You glance at your ink-stained fingers and think, if you're tired after just one night, imagine debating it for centuries. Your eyelids droop heavier now. The lantern flickers, and its flame dances in a way that makes your shadows look like they're bowing with every movement. You imagine all the voices of the past, teachers, lords, poets, scribes, arguing in whispers about what your writing means. Maybe they're scolding your sloppy lines. Maybe they're praising your persistence. Either way, their presence hovers, and it makes the room feel both crowded and lonely at once. There's a certain dreamlike quality to the repetition of writing, and you notice it pulling you under. The characters you've practiced, patience, heart, loyalty, begin to float in your mind like drifting clouds. They dissolve and reform into shapes, and suddenly you're not writing them, you're walking through them. Giant kanji rise around you, tall as castle gates, and you wander between them, brush still in your hand. The ground beneath your feet is made of ink, rippling gently with each step. Sleep is close now, but your mind wants to keep painting. You joke with yourself in the dream haze. Wouldn't it be awful if you had to keep practicing even after falling asleep? Eternal homework. You groan softly, amused, imagining some cosmic instructor looming over your futon, saying, "Your posture is terrible, and your dream kanji are sloppy. Try again." That would be the worst afterlife. An endless writing class with no recess. Still, your body knows better. The ritual has done its job. Your breathing has slowed. Your hand no longer twitches for the brush. Even your restless warrior brain has quieted, lulled into submission by strokes that were never meant to be perfect, only steady. You think of the countless samurai before you who did the same, some under paper lanterns like yours, some under moonlight, some probably nodding off mid-character, just like you are now. It's strangely comforting, knowing that fatigue has always been the most loyal training partner. You let the brush fall gently back into its holder. The inkstone cools in the silence. The fragrance of paper and smoke fades into the background hum of the night. Your tatami mat feels softer now, like it's pulling you down. You roll onto your side, mind still echoing with faint characters, but they blur into nothing as your eyes finally close. And there it is, the unspoken truth. All that discipline, all that debate, all those rituals and quirky habits were really just part of the same cycle, finding balance between action and stillness, between sharpness and softness, between the sword and the brush. Tonight, you've lived it in miniature, tracing the same path that countless others did centuries ago. You drift toward sleep, the arguments of historians and the scent of plum paper fading away, until only the sound of your breath remains. The brush is silent, the ink is dry, the page is finished, and so are you, for tonight.